Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in again. I am Kaylee Batesman, the Content Director at She Can Code, and today we're discussing how to set boundaries at work and learning how to say no. The terms quiet quitting and acting your wage have apparently started to rip through workforces, with employees no longer saying yes to the hustle culture. But is this necessarily a bad thing? With burnout on the rise and a greater focus on mental well-being, should we be setting more boundaries in the workplace? Luckily, I have the wonderful Sandra Moran, Chief Marketing and Customer Experience Officer at Workforce Software, with me today to talk us through why it's important to set boundaries at work, how to stick to them, and why you don't need to sacrifice your career in return. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you for joining us today. Can we set the scene with a little bit of background about yourself, please?
Absolutely. So I am working today as Chief Marketing and Customer Experience Officer at Workforce Software, but with a long career in technology. Interestingly enough, beginning in programming and systems analyst roles myself. And as marketing has become so much more about the use of data and technology to drive business outcomes, to improve the experience of our customers, I couldn't have known at the time that I started my career that it would serve me so well. But over my career, I've worked in virtually every aspect of a technology company, from coding, transitioning into development management, moving from behind the screen to in front of the screen, to a pre-sales role, into marketing, running a product management function, and really settling in this great place where all of those skill sets have come together for me. And again, very, very strong emphasis today on the use of data and analytics in driving the kind of buyer and customer behaviors that we want.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that you started in something slightly more technical, and then because there's such a broad range of roles in technology, and we love that on this podcast, to hear people's backgrounds, where they come from and what they trained in, and how they ended up in tech. Is it always something that you knew you wanted to work in then? Did you train in that when you were a student, or what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, my actual degree is business analytics and business analysis and research. And that is really where I felt like I wanted to be. I can remember being very, very drawn to the technology, the coding, the interaction with driving business outcomes through technology. And I really evolved into the role that I'm in today. I sometimes think it's such a gift for people that just seem to know what they want to do in their career. And what I would say is there were a series of opportunities that were presented to me during my career. I mentioned one. I moved from behind the screen to in front of the screen, so presenting the software that I had been working on. And I took a lot of risks that came to me. The technology industry, as everybody knows, is highly acquisitive. There were acquisitions, there were mergers of organizations that presented opportunities for me to continue to expand my skill set. So I was very open and receptive to doing that. And, again, for me, marketing is really the culmination of all the things that I love so much. It scratches all of my itches, meaning, it has that creative, the beauty of the graphics, the messaging. That's my more, artistic side. And then really today, it is all about systems integration, using data, really dedicating yourself to a level of analytics and observation in order to drive continuous improvement. So although I got there through a series of yeses in my career, this is such a great place for me. And recently expanded from beyond just the marketing role to an experience role inside Workforce Software, where we are trying to take that same great experience that we're trying to offer somebody from that first touch all the way through to the relationship that they have with our company. And that's applying that same discipline of analytics, to really support our customers increasing value from using our solutions. So I'm really taking some of the techniques there and moving it across to other functions inside the organization.
Yeah. And you just said there, you got to where you are today for a series of yeses in your careers. And today we're talking about how difficult it can be to say no. And why do you think it's so hard to say no at work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of human nature. And we are very fundamentally people that are individuals that want to please others. I had a personal situation helping my mother-in-law who was suffering from dementia. So I was doing a lot of research even about that. And even some of the behaviors of dementia patients are grounded in this feeling that they want to please. They know what the social norm is. So, something as simple as wanting to respond to your question, even though they don't really know the answer anymore. I think it's fundamentally ingrained in us as people that it's more difficult to advocate for ourselves than to really just say no. That's not for me right now. So I think one is just this natural inclination to please. I don't want to be stereotypical, but we know that women are more likely to do that than men if we look at the psychological research behind that. But what I have come to understand about saying yes is that when I say yes, I'm inviting something into my life that is going to take time away from something else that might be a greater priority for me and honestly for my company as well.
Yeah, I think as well, you're absolutely right there. And when you're younger as well, I mean, a lot of our listeners are first and second jobbers. And I find that when you're younger, you obviously don't want to say no to anything. You think that you're supposed to say yes to everything and that every opportunity is a good opportunity for you, which isn't always the case. I remember years ago, I was always invited to do public speaking, and I always felt that I was far too young and I had nothing to share that people would want to listen to. And I remember always having to say no, and just, but it almost became a thing. Like I had to find it within myself to push back and say, I don't want to find myself in an environment where I feel like I have nothing to share with anybody. And it's almost like, I think my company at the time that I worked for thought they were doing me a favor and it was going to be a good opportunity, but you do have to push back on the things that are not meant for you, as you said, at that point in time. And that all depends on where you are in your career and your confidence as well. So, something like public speaking, I was nowhere near ready for public speaking at that age. But you're right. I think it's ingrained in us to be people pleasers, isn't it? And we just say yes and then realize maybe we can't follow through on that. And why is that so important then to set those boundaries at work?
Well, I think that you understanding what your boundary is really the first part of that. And you raised a really interesting point with earlier in your career, having the confidence to understand what that is. But if I don't understand my own boundary, I can't really expect anyone else to know what that is. And that is a level of maturity and introspection that you need to take time to do for yourself. Again, not expect that somebody else is going to do that work for you. So as each opportunity presents itself to you, will you do this? I think you have to look at, sometimes it is good to give the gift to your company. It's an honor sometimes to be asked to do something special or something additive, but evaluate whether or not taking on that project meets one of the objectives that you have, either for yourself or for your career advancement, or maybe it's not the time for you in your life to be pursuing career advancement. That doesn't mean you're not a great employee, doesn't mean that you're not doing your job, but that evaluation of, will this new responsibility or this new opportunity help me with something that is important to me? Development of a new skill, experiencing something outside my comfort zone, helping a fellow peer, demonstrating that I am willing to help out when it's a time of need. Those opportunities to really assess what is the value of this, and to feel confident that if it doesn't meet any of those objectives and you're becoming the person that picks up the slack for everybody else, those are really the times when you can say, this is not for me. Because in saying yes, if that's going to create a resentment for you between you and your employer, a resentment between you and a peer, it's better to not allow that to happen than to get to that place where we see so many people today really disgruntled about what they think is an imbalance in their relationship with work. It could be because they've said yes to things that they should have said no to in the first place.
Yeah, and I think the pandemic has changed a lot of that, hasn't it? People's boundaries were really just completely reset, I think, for a lot of us working from home, working remotely, and even just times that we work and whether or not we're available at certain hours, and all of that really was reset by the pandemic. And I was going to ask you about some examples of these boundaries, and I think probably if I'd asked you this a couple of years ago, they would have been completely different examples.
Absolutely. I mean, if you just, sometimes I just sit back and think about the magnitude of the change in almost every aspect of our personal lives, as well as our professional lives. I don't think anyone could have imagined that we would be even having the conversations that we're having today. So I think the pandemic really was a time of awakening. We were isolated. We had time to really think about what was most important to us. And some people came out of that with this new idea about what is my boundary, what am I willing to do or not to do. And I also see a huge gift from the pandemic. And that was, I think pre-pandemic, in many ways, we weren't even allowed to be people. I never saw in anyone's house. I didn't see their dog. I didn't see them hug their children. There is also a beauty in the humanity that has come out of that. But as we're talking about, again, that is really my responsibility then to think about how does that affect the boundaries that I have, and a willingness for me to own what those feelings are and to communicate that. So just because I saw in your house doesn't mean that I know what is important to you. You need to be willing to share and communicate openly what's important to you versus expecting that somebody else knows and then being resentful when they don't respect a boundary they didn't know existed.
Yes, it's so interesting you saying that, because you're absolutely right. Those boundaries of also allowing people into your home, for lots of us who hadn't worked from home before, having to log on and share with our colleagues, where we lived and whether or not people lived alone, and trying to find space to work at the time. And we also do live webinars at She Can Code. And every time I do it, I find it very strange that I invite, a couple of hundred people into my home instead of, normally I would have done that in an office environment. But yeah, those boundaries have really, really been pushed. In terms of employers, do you think that employers might view our boundaries of us not being ambitious or a team player if we speak up about certain things?
I think that managers in companies are people too. So, we shouldn't assume, a blanket generalization about somebody feeling one way or another. There certainly are what I would call, old school thinkers that may not be as receptive to those ideas. But I will say that I do believe that employers are becoming more aware of the scarcity of resource. They're becoming more aware of the need to retain employees and the value of retaining employees. We're giving managers and companies a lot better information about that today. So being willing to communicate with your employer about what is right for you. And then, you may not get everything you want, but you're 100% guaranteed you won't get anything you want if you don't ask for it. And the recognition that there is value to retaining the employee. Can we negotiate something that is a better relationship for both of us? So if I knew you were going to leave, often in an exit interview, we find out that somebody's leaving for something that we could have or would have been willing to do. So I would say, again, confidence, have the presence to communicate what it is that's important to you. Go in with the belief that you're a valuable employee and that your employer will want to find a way to do it if they can, and advocate for yourself. Workforce Software does a lot of work with very, very large employers, primarily deskless employees. The kind of software that we do handles scheduling and attendance and communications. And I'll say that, in a large employer situation, don't expect that your manager really, really understands what your life circumstances are. Today, again, we're talking about technology. We can use technology to alert managers to things that they're not going to have the ability to see, and allow them to adapt more proactively to what might be the circumstance for an employee. So I'll give you an example. 5 overtime shifts, extra overtime shifts over a 2-week period might be the best thing ever for an employee who has scheduling flexibility, who's trying to save. 5 overtime shifts for a single mother who's working, probably not a great thing. So alerting somebody, having that interaction, sometimes enabled by technology, and then being able to make an accommodation that matches the individual's need, not just this blanket, hey, everybody here has to. That can help managers create some of these better compromises, if you will, based on what an employee really values. But it starts with being willing to say, this isn't good for me. What employer can you do to help me with that?
Yes, because I wanted to ask you about that so-called hustle culture and whether or not the tide is turning. But as you just mentioned there, even, the technology that's available nowadays, just to bring, something to a manager's awareness as to, as you said, whether or not it works for somebody. If somebody wants those overtime shifts, and they're available to do it, then why not? But I think the tide is definitely starting to turn. Would you agree?
I do. I do also still believe that there are people for whom ambition and drive are always going to be part of their, mentality and their aspiration. And, neither one of those is a silver bullet or the definitive standard for everybody. And I do feel like, again, sort of pandemic opening our eyes to the reality that the balance is shifted more toward the employee. And it is not a blanket employee population. People have an expectation because of really the life, our personal life, that things should be personalized to their need. And, I think we do have an opportunity to address things at that level when we're balancing what the employee needs with the company has to stay in business. It still has to meet.
Yeah.
But we can find a way to have an employee for whom their boundary and standard is this. And an employee who does want to do more, one is not good and one is not bad. It's about finding the relationship and balance that's right for that individual. Yeah. If you look at things like scarcity of resources, we may have to do things that we have not done in the past. You might want, again, I'll give you an example from manufacturing. It's great when the line runs from 7:30 in the morning to 4:30, and I've got a full group that's willing to do that. There's a lot of people for whom that level of work is not desirable. Can an organization break those shifts up so that they can create more of a gig economy style culture? So maybe I can attract an employee who does want to work 3 days a week or on a different shift schedule. That doesn't make them a less desirable employee. It means finding a balance between what that employee wants to do and the need of the business in order to, to create this personalized experience where both win. I need workers. You want to work you're not a bad employee because what works for you is less time at work.
Yes, and when you say they're both win instead of one being burnt out and your employer being the only one that's winning. Can we be successful in our careers while maintaining our boundaries, do you think?
Absolutely. And, when I even just look back on my own career, there were times that I was building and growing, and that meant that I was willing to say yes to more new opportunities. There was times in my career where I was, balancing obligations inside my family, and I wasn't looking for more at those times. So again, I think that is about you being comfortable about what it is that feels right to you, you being confident enough to communicate what is that boundary, finding that middle ground. It isn't always about you doing more and taking on more in order to move through your career. It's about being clear about where you are, what it is that you want to do, saying yes to opportunities that help you develop those new skills, flex those new muscles, and do it in a way that is authentic to what feels right for you. Not letting yourself get into that place where you become resentful because you said yes. Don't assume that the other person knows the price of the yes to you.
Yes. And do you think that leadership teams should be promoting boundary setting as part of their culture? Because I always believe it should trickle down, shouldn't it? If you don't see that you can set boundaries from the top, if people are not blocking out their calendars because they're doing something, they need to do the school run or whatever it may be, then it's not going to trickle down, is it, and be part of the rest of the culture. You'll feel quite awkward having to say, I've set this boundary if my team leader isn't doing the same thing.
Absolutely. And that is such an important part of the culture and commitment of the leadership team. I certainly have worked for individuals who made me feel like, and I think this was pre-pandemic, we were always on, we were talking about always being on. My phone was there. I was never, I have worked for people who clearly set that as an expectation. And it was my responsibility then to say, you know what, I'm not available at this time. I'm in I have something that I'm doing. I recently got an email from a customer that I absolutely loved. And in the signature line, I don't remember the exact wording, but it said something like, please don't interpret my emailing you at this time as a requirement for you to reply. It just so happens to work for me that I'm working at this time. And I just love that subtle reminder that, that's a great example of, maybe I worked and then I did something for my family and I'm back online. But that is not an indication to you that my expectation is you're always there. Reply tomorrow. But it
Yes.
does require the discipline and the communication that you're saying that to employees and you're modeling the behavior that you're expecting. I don't expect someone to reply if I just so happen to pick up my phone and think of something and I want to communicate it at that time. I think it's a fabulous reminder and really should be part of what leaders are saying to their employees about their own work style and what they expect from their employees in terms of, don't reply just because I've sent this to you.
Yes, oh, that's a great example, because I think we've all seen emails late in the evening, and you're absolutely right. And if somebody says you do automatically think, should I respond? Should I quickly go back? Am I meant to be working incredibly late? Because you are. And especially if your company is global as well, you kind of get in that mindset of you're on all the time, and it just gets to a point where it's just not good for you and your employer, as we've mentioned. And based on that's great advice in itself. But do you have any advice for our listeners struggling to set those boundaries at work?
Yes, and it really starts with you sitting down and defining what that is for yourself. Until you've done the work to determine what feels right to you, you can't expect that anybody else is going to adapt to that. So, I would even suggest that if you're really, really struggling with replying, that you think about writing down, what would I say? Why would I? But please don't come to the relationship assuming that saying no is the wrong thing, that it's going to be misinterpreted. Give the individual that you're going to say no to the benefit of, you don't really have to explain yourself. This is not something that fits into my work schedule. Deliver it with confidence. The more unsure you are about why you're saying no, the more that's going to be telegraphed to the individual that's asking you to do something. So I would say, understand clearly for yourself, what is your boundary? Is it hours? Is it cumulative time? Is it an expectation that you're going to take on something out of your comfort zone? What is it that makes you feel like this isn't the right thing for you? Get in touch with what that is, and then be clear about what you do want to say yes to and what you need to say no to, so that you're in the right place for you in this moment in your career.
Yes, and I suppose you're right, it's pick and choosing as well, isn't it? What you say no to, what you say yes to, and also how you communicate that. Because if you just quickly fire an email back to somebody because it's 5:05 and you say, I'm sorry, my working hours are only 9 till 5, that's probably not a battle that you needed to pick. You really need to.
Yeah. But again, I think it don't feel compelled that you have to describe or justify why that isn't the right answer for you. Yeah. And that is in being more communicative up front rather than reacting to everything as it's coming in. And, I do have people on my team that have been very clear with me about, at this moment, this is what is right for me. I'm grateful that I know that. And then I find other ways to get things done. I don't keep going back to that same person with an expectation. And I'm not resentful that this is not the time that they're interested in additional responsibilities, additional growth opportunities. That's fine. There is likely somebody else who may welcome that opportunity. And again, it's like a point in your career, a young mother, even a young father. I'm so grateful that the burden of household chores, but the joy of child rearing is not just the woman's responsibility. This might not be your time for that. And me knowing that means that I also, as a manager, am not wondering why you're not doing this. It's a communication is a two-way street.
Yeah. And so what do you do then if boundaries are broken? How do you politely say no?
Same thing. Open communication.
Yeah.
How we respond, being thoughtful about that. Your example was a great one. It's 5:05. It's probably not because it's 5:05. It's probably because there were a series of things that happened that were testing your boundaries. Find the right moment, communicate with the individual in a professional way. That doesn't mean you back off of your boundary, but it means that you're thoughtful about what got you to the point where you wanted to fire that email at 5:05. Why are you sending this to me right now? And we all, in every relationship, sometimes we give more than we get. Sometimes we get more than we give. I feel like if you're in a keeping score mode, you're probably pretty unhappy about doing that. Your relationship at work is like your relationships in life. So if you feel yourself getting into scorekeeping mode, I did this, I did that, I did, understand what feels good to you and then give it with joy. And when it feels like it's a burden, that's time for you to get in touch with, why does this feel like a burden to me? Have I worked more than I wanted to? Did I accept tasks that are really not in my best interest nor the company's best interest long term? Because if you're doing something significantly below your pay grade or ability, that's preventing you from doing something that has higher value to the company as well. So I wouldn't always look at it as, what am I unwilling to? This is not in my job description. That's one of my least favorite things. But if you look at the truth in, it's not in my job description, and you own the opportunity to do what you should be doing and what this is preventing you from doing, you will be able to navigate to a better place for yourself and a better place for your employer. And sometimes we do things that are not in our job description and our employers are grateful, but that cannot become the norm such that the business isn't meeting its objectives and you feel a burden from having said yes.
Yeah, and I think that depends as well on the type of company you work for. And I love working for a startup, and it's a culture that I enjoy. But if I turned around every time I wanted to say that's not part of my job description, we would never move forward, because there's not enough of us to just say it's somebody else's job. You have to pick up those things when you're starting, as long as you feel that a company is moving towards a larger team where people will eventually pick those things up. We have to get to that point. And it's a two-way street, obviously, but it does depend on the company, because we would never move forward. But in terms of setting boundaries, I had a great conversation with a lady a few weeks ago who said to me she works part-time, and she said, what you were saying there about the interest of the company and the team, she said, I have to set quite strong boundaries, because working part-time means if I pop up on the wrong days, I'm not actually helping my team at all, because then they're not sure when can they contact me, when can't they contact me. And she said it actually becomes a real headache for my team if I pop up on days when I'm not meant to be there. So she said, actually, in terms of boundaries, they're not just for her, they're for her team as well. And that enables her to be flexible, enables her to be a young mum and do what she needs to do at this point in her life. But I suppose those boundaries they're important for everybody to know what they are.
Absolutely. I think that's a great example. And if you think about how that translates to our new hybrid working environment, that clarity of when can I reach you, when can't I reach you, is really important, because there are times, as we all know, that we do need to be together. We do need to collaborate. We do need to make a decision. Even setting some working guidelines about how to work when this individual is not available. Those are things that you should be discussing before the need arises. Especially where people could be working different schedules that are working, toward a similar project, working toward what is the protocol that we're going to use when we would ever reach out to this person off hours. Also, if you're working a hybrid schedule, your business has to continue. So don't be offended if the business moved forward and you were not part of that. that kind of dialogue about what happens when, that should be happening when we're setting work schedules, when we understand what people's boundaries are, and own the fact that if that is your work life, that you are giving up something for the flexibility that you've asked for, and be comfortable that that's appropriate and that is the compromise you're willing to make. I'll call it loss of control, if you will, in order to have the flexibility that's important to you. But those are things people should go into with their eyes wide open, communicate openly about, talk through the contingency plans, if you will, so that you're prepared and that people aren't surprised. And you're not going to get everything right. After something happens that was unplanned, be confident to communicate what went wrong, what didn't go wrong. That sort of like festering, waiting for somebody to realize what impact that had on me, that's an unhealthy place to be. And again, it's about confidence and communication, that you would take ownership in your role in getting to a place that you want to be.
Yes, I love that. Just understanding when you are missing, meetings still happen, things still move forward. Yeah, that's a great example. And we're almost out of time, but I have one question I wanted to ask you, because boundaries, they're always easier when starting somewhere new. But do you have any tips on drawing the lines when you've been in a role for some time? Do people think they can just ask you anything at that point?
It is good to start out, but it's never too late to change what is happening in your life. So don't assume that because you've been doing something for a long time that you don't owe it to yourself and deserve to ask for things that are right for you and to communicate and advocate for yourself. If you assume your employer has the desire to keep you, and you don't have the courage to communicate what's important to you, you're really limiting their ability to do the right thing for you. So, we use a saying in my team all the time about assume positive intent. If you approach it assuming this was a mistake, this was a miscommunication, this happened, they didn't mean it, let's go find a way to resolve it. That's a healthier approach. That doesn't mean, again, every time you're going to get what you want, but just because you've said yes in the past, or just because you've gotten yourself into a situation, there is no time like today to articulate what the truth is for you and to advocate for yourself. And give your employer or your peer the opportunity to hear what you're saying and respond. Don't assume that what you're asking for is going to be outside the realm. They certainly would hate to lose you over something that they could have addressed with you that you didn't give them the opportunity to change. If they say no, see ya. But it's you're depriving me of the opportunity to do the right thing. So, asking for something, what's the worst thing that can happen? They'll say no, and then you're not in the right place, versus giving somebody the gift to save you, to find an accommodation. We don't want to learn that in the exit interview.
Yeah, lovely. That is lovely, positive advice to end on there, because we're already out of time. Thank you, Sandra, so much for joining us for a chat today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.